Start by removing the metal clamps from the rubber boots holding up the carburetor. Do the same for both sides of the bike. There are 4 clamps in total. Make sure you drain the fuel from the float bowls or else the gasoline can splash out and make things a little messy. Go ahead and disconnect the fuel drain lines from each side of the carb. Lift the carb assembly at the rear and try to pop it out of the airbox boots. This should cause the intake boots to become free as well. Be as careful as you can here so that the rubber boots as well as the carb itself don't become damaged. It will usually take some force to do this step. Once the rubber boots are disconnected, just wiggle the entire carb out towards the left side of the bike, being careful not to snag it on anything. With a carb in this position, easy access to the cables becomes available. You will need to remove both the push and pull throttle lines as well as the choke cable. Once the cables are disconnected, the carburetor assembly will be completely free of the bike. Reinstallation is much more difficult than the removal. A trick that I use to make it a little easier is to gain access to the airbox boots through the airbox itself. Remove the airbox lid and filter, as well as the breather line and metal mesh screen. You can then pop the airbox boots right out of place. Inspect the boots for any damage. It's difficult to find a replacement set, so be careful with them. This is where I like to start using my secret weapon, this rubber-safe silicone spray from WD-40. Be sure not to use regular WD-40 as that will destroy your rubber over time. I use copious amounts of the spray all over the boots and it helps to set the car back in place by a lot. Go ahead and lube up the boot and then over insert it into the airbox. I'll explain what I mean by that when we take a look at the second boot. Here is the second boot. Just reach into the airbox and pinch it a little to pop it right out of place. Spray it with some silicone lube and then compress the flange side and shove it in all the way into the airbox. This will give us much needed clearance when we go to fit the carburetor back in. Here's a comparison of what a normal seating position looks like versus the over insertion, where the red line indicates exposed boot length. Go ahead and lube up the intake boots with silicone spray as well. I just use my hands here as an applicator so I don't get any into the combustion chambers. Now it's time to install the car back into the bike. The first step is to attach all of the cables. That would be the push and pull throttle cables as well as the choke. With that step completed, it's now time for the most challenging part of this whole operation, seating the car back into the boots. Since we have the airbox boots over inserted, they're out of the way, making it much easier to wiggle the carb into position and into the intake boots. You should feel when the carbs are properly seated when they sort of pop into place. It does take some force, but the silicone lube makes it much easier. Now for the real hard part, seating the airbox boots in place. You have to reach your hand in through the airbox and push the boot into position while guiding it with your other hand. You'll have to pinch the flange part on the boot, that is the part inside the airbox, in order to get it to seat on the airbox itself, while making sure there's proper alignment with the carburetor. It sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. You'll benefit from having grip strength and dexterity in your hands. It is possible to install the carbs with the boots already seated in the airbox. However, it can be very rough on the rubber boots, and finding replacements is very difficult and expensive should they break. I actually find this to be the easiest method as you have a lot of control over the airbox boots. Take your time and eventually it will go back together. I spent about 5 minutes per boot in order to get them seated again, and it was very easy on the rubber. Go ahead and do the same procedure for the other airbox boot. With the carb back in position, you can replace the metal mesh and breather tube back into the airbox. Don't forget the filter and then button it all back up with the lid. Finally, reconnect your fuel drain lines as well as all 4 boot clamps and you're ready to test it out.